Now it is my pleasure to introduce Senator Ben Cardin, who has been in the Senate since 2006, working on so many committees I don't know when the man sleeps, including Foreign Affairs, Finance, Budget, Environment, Public Works, Small Business, and Entrepreneurship. Senator Cardin, for 20 years, represented Maryland's 3rd Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. The Washington Post recently called him a legislator's legislator. That's the highest praise in this capital. And a sensible, tough-minded, and independent public service. Senator Cardin.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Let me thank Marvin Cowell for those very kind and generous remarks. Marvin Cowell is one of my heroes, one of the great journalists of our generation. Anyone who's on Richard Nixon's enemies list is a friend of mine. So Rabbi Fishman, let me thank you very much for your hospitality here this evening. To get an aliyah this close to Yuntuf and not have a card I have to turn down, I very much appreciate that very much. Myrna and I are very pleased to be here because we're with people who are doing very important work for Israel and the United States, and we thank you very much. To Sharon Wilkes, I want to thank you for your leadership with this organization, giving it the continuity, stability that it needs. You do very professional work, and we thank you very much for that. I want to acknowledge my colleague, Sandy Rosenberg, who's here as a member of the House of Delegates from Baltimore. We've been colleagues for a long, long time. Thank you, Sandy, for all of you. You may have noticed that Ambassador Moses had to leave. She came over and whispered to me. I didn't realize that she was such a fan. She's getting up early tomorrow to work a polling place for me. That's why she had to leave. So it's good to be here. I want to acknowledge Ambassador Shifter, if I might, for one moment, because he indicated some of the changes that you've seen in the United Nations. And that's fact. There's been a change in the United Nations. Not that it is where it needs to be. It's far from that. But the leadership of Dick Shifter has made a huge difference in now our expectation and hope that, in fact, we can make a difference in the United Nations, both in the Security Council and in the General Assembly. I've known Ambassador Shifter, I guess, all my adult life. He has been a great citizen for the people of Maryland in the work that he's done to help disadvantaged children and to do so many things for our local community. He's a national and international leader, and he continues to provide extraordinary leadership for our country. He is truly a great American, and Ambassador Shifter, thank you so much for everything you've done. Now, I'm one of 12 Jewish members of the United States Senate. We have a minion. We have a minion. We also have a Talmud class. We do meet in the Talmud class. It's part of some of the best debates we have in the Senate. It's in our Talmud class. When I was in the House of Representatives, we had a Talmud class of the Jewish members of the House. And we would meet on a regular basis and go over the contemporary problems of our time, using our Jewish tradition to help us solve those problems. And a few years back, one of the members of the House of Representatives had decided to change his party affiliation, Representative Hayes. And we were all very upset about that because we were counting the numbers in order to try to get back at that time the control of the House of Representatives. And in our Talmud class, we determined that Representative Hayes was still a Democrat because his mother is a Democrat. So we want you to know that our Jewish tradition has come in very helpful. It's really helped us a great deal. As Marvin Cow pointed out, I also serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It's a committee that I'm really honored to serve on. And we do deal with all of the international problems. We meet with heads of state. In informal settings, we meet with our top diplomats. And not too long ago, we had a chance to meet with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. It was in a closed session, but what I'm telling you is not any national secret. At that time, she was going over the strategy of the United States with Arab Spring, going over the challenges we have in dealing with countries who are strategically important to the United States, but don't share our values. And I pointed out to Secretary Clinton at that moment the obvious. There is one country, and one country only, in the Middle East that's strategically important to the United States and shares our values, and that's the State of Israel. And that it's important for the United States to recognize that special relationship as we work within the United Nations and as we work on our bilateral relations with our countries. Since 1948, when Harry Truman, against the advice of the State Department, recognized the State of Israel, that special relationship between Israel and the United States has remained strong. And it is strong today. And we are committed to making sure that relationship stays strong. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that's a democratic state with Western values. They share our commitment of an independent judiciary, and certainly a very vibrant democracy where they have multiple parties and more opinions than there are Israelis. We know that. But it's a country that offers hope to the international community that democracy can spread in the Middle East. Israel wants peace between the Palestinians and themselves. We all want peace. We all want Israel and the Palestinians living side by side in peace, recognizing each other's rights to exist with secure boundaries. We all want that. I will share with you a conversation I had when Myrna and I were visiting Israel right after the last elections, before Mr. Netanyahu had formed his government, but after the election results were in. And it was quite clear that Mr. Netanyahu would be the next prime minister of Israel. I was the first American diplomat to be traveling to Israel and had a chance to meet with Mr. Netanyahu and had a very interesting discussion. It was a discussion where he relayed to us his commitment to move forward, if he were to form a new government, to seek peace with the Palestinians. How he thought that was critically important for Israel's future, and that he would be a leader to move forward with peace. Now, the reason I can be very specific about this is that the American ambassador to Israel was also present at that meeting. He wrote his notes up and forwarded them to the State Department, and you all can read them on WikiLeaks. Didn't get much press because when it's good news for Israel, as Mr. Benjamin knows, it doesn't always get a lot of press. But the point is, Israel wants peace, but it has to have a partner to make peace. I had a chance to talk to President Clinton shortly after Camp David blew up with Chairman Arafat, who was not interested in making peace with the Israelis. And one has to question how far President Abbas will go with the influence of Hamas. Israel needs a partner to make peace. And the only way it can happen is through direct negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That's the only way we can do peace in the Middle East. Any attempt by the Palestinians to try to circumvent the peace negotiations through the United Nations will not work. Will not work. If the Security Council were to pass a resolution, the United States will veto it. They've made that very clear. In fact, This administration has a 100% voting record with Israel in the United Nations. Why? Because it's in our country's interest. Israel is our strategic partner, our most important strategic partner in the Middle East, and Israel shares our values. We rely upon Israel. Just look at what's happening in Iran today. Who else but the United States and Israel could have any ability to use cyber attacks to slow down Iran's nuclear ambitions? Now, I can talk freely about that because I haven't had any classified briefings on that, which to me is good news, because it may be continuing. That's good. But U.S. leadership in the United Nations is extremely important. You've heard about that by our previous speakers, and I'm not going to repeat everything that they've said. But it was clear that when the resolutions were being contemplated to circumvent the peace process, that the Palestinians were not able to get the votes they thought they could have gotten in the Security Council. Now, why couldn't they get their 9 votes? They couldn't get their 9 votes because of why you're here this evening, because of the organization you're supporting, because of the work that they did in talking to delegates from other countries and energizing the political system in America to be much more sensitive to UN votes. Secretary Clinton and myself have talked several times about this directly. Any bilateral meeting during that time that the Secretary had included the United Nations and votes within the United Nations. When the Secretary of State lets other countries know that what they do in the United Nations is important to the United States, we get different action in the United Nations. That was a direct result of the efforts. Sure, the United States could have taken the old route of veto, but we are now committed to what you're committed, to changing the numbers within the United Nations, to make it more favorable. The Palestinians could not get that 9 votes in the Security Council because we changed some of those votes. We did. By simply going over with the country the United States position. I had a chance to talk several times with representatives of Bosnia. I chaired, at the time, the United States Helsinki Commission. I am the Senate Chairman of the United States Helsinki Commission. That's a group that works internationally on a lot of different issues, primarily in Europe. Bosnia is trying to get more legitimacy within the OSCE, within the Helsinki process. Their ambassador is in my office almost monthly to talk about progress being made on their constitutional problems. Every time that ambassador was in my office, I talked a little bit about the UN vote. They understood. They got the message. They need the United States support. Well, we need their help also. And Bosnia was not going to be a vote on behalf of the Palestinians. We changed the Security Council votes. We made a difference. The United States Congress passed resolutions. I was proud to be the author of the resolution with Senator Collins, a Republican from Maine, because this is not a partisan issue. This is not a partisan issue. Well, over a year ago, we presented resolutions on the floor of the United States Senate to make it clear that we would not accept the United Nations actions as it related to the Palestinian, that direct negotiations between the parties was the only course. That resolution passed 100-0 on the floor of the United States Senate. I believe it passed by unanimous vote. But it was, we had over 85 co-sponsors to that resolution. And then we authored, the two of us, Senator Collins and myself, a letter to President Abbas. And like Ambassador Moses said, we were pretty direct. We told President Abbas exactly how we felt. And that is that if he were to pursue a vote in the United Nations, there would be consequences. Now understand, We want peace in the Middle East. We want the Palestinians to succeed. But they need to understand that when they do things that are anti-American, going against the leadership of our country, which is critically important to move forward on the peace process, that we're going to take note of that. And there will be consequences from those actions. I think that had some impact also. So you've heard the numbers between the United States, Israel, and the United Nations. And you've heard Ambassador Shifter, you heard Marvin Cobb talk about we shouldn't leave the United Nations. Well, it's unanimous. I agree. I don't believe the United States should pull out of the United Nations. Let me, though, quote the problems we have from our permanent representative, Ambassador Rice, when she said, all countries come in for knocks every now and then at the United Nations, including our own. Nobody is above fair criticism. But what Israel faces is something very different. It's relentless, it's obsessive, it's ugly, it's bad for the United Nations, it's bad for peace, and has got to stop. Well, that's what we're committed to see happen. The United Nations, as we all know, was formed after World War II, which is the bloodiest war in our history. It was formed to maintain and protect international peace and security, developing friendly relations among nations to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems, and to be the center for harmonizing the actions of nations. That mission that was passed after World War II is just as relevant today as it was back then. So we need a functioning United Nations. Let me just give you some examples why and how it's helped the United States. It legitimates actions when we can get the international community to work with us. The Iranian sanctions today are more effective because we have Security Council resolutions. They are. I don't know if they'll work or not, but I know they had no chance of working if we couldn't have gotten the Security Council votes. I give the President Obama credit for being able to work the minefields within the Security Council to get that done. It gives us a lot more legitimacy. We know we cannot allow a nuclear Iran. We have gone through the international community. The international community has spoken. Iran is violating its international commitments. We have the legitimacy. In Libya, we sought United Nations action. None of us wanted this to be a U.S.-led mission. We are overburdened today. The effectiveness of the Libyan mission was because we had the support of the international community. We had the support from the region. We had the support on the ground. And we were successful in getting rid of Gaddafi. It worked. It worked. We need the United Nations today to help the people of Syria. Now, I'll tell you, what's happening in Syria is outrageous and wrong to the Syrian people. President Assad is a person who has clearly violated international human rights and is a war criminal. There's no question in my mind about that. And we need international action so that we can stop the suffering of the people of Syria. His regime has lost all legitimacy. That's not just the United States saying that, it's the Arab League saying that. But we got to work within the United Nations to bring about better action to stop the massacres occurring in Syria. Now, quite frankly, Russia and China are doing the wrong thing. They're on the wrong side of history. We think they're going to change. We hope sooner rather than later. We need to change the views within the United Nations to help Israel. Israel needs international legitimacy. It has international legitimacy. It needs stronger friends. We can help. There are more Ambassador Moseses that we can cultivate by what we do. So I must tell you, I wanted to be here tonight, first because I admire Ambassador Shifter and what he has done, how one person has made a huge difference but I wanted to be here tonight to tell you, thank you for supporting this cause. Thank you for supporting, I'll get the name right, the American Jewish International Relations Institute. Thank you for supporting it. I think this is critically important for Israel and the United States. Yasher Koch, and thank you for being here. And have a joyous Passover.
You've just heard these really wonderful remarks by Senator Cardin. I just would like to round it out on 2 points. Senator Cardin talked about a resolution that was adopted by the United States Senate that dealt with the issue of the Palestinian application for UN membership. It was the Cardin resolution. Just take a look at it. It was adopted by 100 people. It was a Cardin resolution. The sponsor of the resolution was Ben Cardin. I also want to tell you, he made reference to our getting one vote, very important vote, in the Security Council, Bosnia. It was Senator Cardin who got that vote. As a matter of fact, when I was at the U.S. mission to the UN, they told me that the Bosnian ambassador had talked to them, explaining that Senator Cardin had been after them. Just want you to know that.